Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Yeah, here was me worried about my recording, but I think touch wood, we're doing all right. Melissa, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you, Emily. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you. As you can see, I'm surrounded by guitars. This isn't my
Yeah, of
house.
course.
I do not
Yep.
play guitars. This
Live with
is
Mick
my dad.
Jagger. Yeah.
Yeah. Just a poser. But yeah, all good. How are you finding your writing coming up to Christmas?
Yeah, it's a little bit. It's one of those things where, on the one hand, I'm going to have some free time over Betwixtmas, but on the other
Excellent.
hand, I'm thinking, oh my God, there's so much Christmas stuff to do. I don't even have children, and there's so much Christmas stuff to do.
It's
So
like it's
it's kind
crappening,
of
isn't
up and
it?
down. Yep.
Oh yeah. Have you like started your Christmas admin, your crowdmin?
I have. I have started my
Well
crapping.
done.
I have actually. I've been doing quite well, apart from a
Good.
couple of things I lost in transit, which is slightly stressful because they are very specific branded items from teenage family members. So I'm like, oh no.
Wow, God, that's yeah, and there's all these strikes, postal strikes and everything. It's
Yep.
things are
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and I have children and I have not even started yet. So
Oh, nice.
yeah, it's we'll see what happens. Here's this leaf for Christmas. Um, good luck, everyone. Um, but anyway, what we're actually here to talk about is not crapping, is how to win a novel award because obviously we are shortly about to open the Right Mentor Children's Novel Award and Picture Book Award.
We
Um,
are.
yeah, and so Melissa and I thought we should have a little chat, given that we've both got kind of extensive experience, haven't we? It's kind of in different ways, sort of launched ourselves, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah,
Competitions.
definitely. Yeah, and I think competitions wise is the thing that you have the most control over entering before you have an agent, before you have a publisher. So I think it's the thing that a lot of people might have experience with that are listening, and then obviously thinking about how you move from not listing, because that was me, years and years not listing, to getting into listing.
Yeah, that's a really
Yeah,
good way of putting it. And it's
yeah,
true because actually, especially with some of the publishing-based competitions,
hmm
it's like being on submission in a way. It's a chance to,
yeah,
it is your way to kind of send your work directly to publishers, which doesn't
yeah,
happen 99% of the time. So
yeah.
it can be make or break. No, not break. That's horrible. It can be make. Um, it can be
But the
make.
great thing is, it's not break. That's what's
Yeah,
great
yeah,
about it. You
exactly.
can just go again. Yeah.
What she said doesn't destroy your career if you don't get listed. Anyway,
Well, no,
welcome
you
to
can do
this.
that later.
This,
Time for that
yeah,
later.
yeah. So, like maybe to get started, should we talk a little bit about us and our experience?
Yeah, that sounds good. So, should I go first?
You go for it.
Cool. Well, so I have always entered competitions from when I started writing novels, even before I'd finished one, which do as I say, not as I do. That's always a bad idea. Like, that is going to be one of the rule number one. Make sure you finish the novel
Hmm.
before sending it in. However, um, it was one of the first things I think, like, I remember the Times Chicken House Award, because that's been going for long time now, 10 years, 12 years, something like that.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was first starting out, my parents would see that in the Times and they'd be like, oh, look at this competition. And then as you Google stuff and you find websites and newsletters that tell you about all these competitions, you find way more stuff. So I definitely from very early was entering competitions
Hmm.
and obviously getting disappointed and, setting budgets and all that, which we can talk about. But the main thing was I didn't list in anything at all for the first few years I was doing it. And I think possibly it's just because I was throwing stuff into the ether. So I entered Mslexia, I entered Northern Writing Awards, which I think every area in the UK has one, and probably areas outside of the UK, but it's basically local funds and grants. I counted that as a competition. I would enter, obviously, Times Chicken House competition. I would enter Wells. Oh, God, there's so many. And in the end, I realised I was just sort of throwing stuff into the ether, and some of these competitions cost a lot of money.
Hmm.
So I realized I had to be a little bit more strategic about it. When I started being strategic about it, which we can talk about, that was when I started listing for stuff. So I've long listed a couple of times for Mslexia and for Bath, and I've shortlisted for the inaugural Hachette Children's Prize, which is a New Writing North grant prize, which is free to enter. So it was quite nice. And the Wales Book for Children Prize I shortlisted for. So, but this was all after I started being more strategic with entering competitions. Not that it wasn't just fun before, and it was fun. And I met some people that had also entered them, and it was great. But there is a way, I think, if you want to progress with competitions, that you need to start being a little bit more strategic. So I think that's what we're going to talk about. But yeah, that's pretty much all of my knowledge about it. What about you, Emily? Because obviously you had a blinder year. Was it last year or year before?
Uh, oh God, what was it? It's 2022 now. Yeah, basically last year, I think, which
Yeah.
was
But you would
like
have entered in 2020.
2020.
So
So technically, I'll come to that in a minute. Yeah. So
Yeah.
technically, I think the competition was dated the year before, but it was last year. But yeah, so my first experience of and competitions actually got me into writing properly, and I think because I think like everybody else, I'd like written my whole life, but never thought of it as a potential career. It was just something that was my lovely thing that I did when I was needed cheering up, or I kind of wanted to sort of use my brain in some kind of way. I would go and write.
Yeah.
And then I can't remember why, but in about 2017 I picked up that one of the, is it Writing Magazine or Writers Magazine?
Yeah.
And it has like issues, I think, has like a list of all of the writing competitions on the
Yeah.
back.
Amazing pullout. If anyone doesn't know about that,
Yeah.
Writing Magazine. The pullout they do every quarter is so good.
Is it every quarter, is it? It is, yeah.
It's
Like, so
every
this was
quarter.
purely coincidental. I happened to pick it up at this time, and found these competitions, and this was a totally new world to me. I had no idea that these things existed. And knowing how my brain works, I thought, well, like competition is literally the only way to kind of get things. I need that hit of dopamine. Like, that's the only way to really get anything done. So I went, right, do you know what? I'm going to enter Bath. Because I lived near Bath, or I did. I like Bath. Bath is nice. So, like, let's just go for this one, having no idea of, what it meant or anything. And I wrote a very early version. It's how I started the book that is coming out next year, back in 2017, when my main character was 4, because I had no idea about how to write books at all. And I'd written about 10,000 words when I'd entered it. And they always ask you how many words is your manuscript? And I put, oh, I don't know yet. And funnily enough, I didn't get listed. Yeah, and that was a
Bold,
big.
bold creative decision.
I know. So I think that was a big learning curve for me. But I knew that if I wanted to kind of go any further with this book, that competitions was the way to kind of sort of incentivize myself to do it. That, and actually the Right Mentor Summer Program, which was another sort of incentive, a kind of dopamine fueled incentive.
Yeah.
But actually, so once I'd done the Right Mentor Program and I'd actually had a finished manuscript, I entered the Mslexia. No, I entered Bath again. Didn't get listed at all. And at that point, I was like, and this was my finished manuscript, so I was like, oh, maybe it's time to move on. But I'd also entered Mslexia. And then I got a phone call. I knew I'd been longlisted in the January, and I got a phone call. I think like I can't even remember, but not too long afterwards, saying, "Oh, you've won," and I was there, like sort of 3-month-old baby in one hand, like hadn't showered in 3 days, and I was like, "Oh my gosh!" And then it just kind of spiraled from there because, firstly, the competition, winning that competition in the first place, what it meant to me financially, like at that time, it meant I could keep my daughter in nursery, like, which was, it meant that we could like eat. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but it was,
No, no, it does not with
it
writing.
doesn't, like,
Absolutely
it
not.
really, what actually, aside from that kind of amazing sort of boost in my writing career, it really
Yeah.
helped us in a bit of a financial bind. And that was fantastic, but it didn't necessarily go after I won Mslexia, as amazing as it was, and kind of the contacts it opened up, and it didn't necessarily go how I thought it would. Everyone was like, "Oh, you're going to get snapped up by an agent," and the agent judge was wonderful, and she was so lovely, and she said, "Look, it stood out in terms of the competition, but it's just not something that I can represent." And I was like, "Oh, okay, what now?" And I wasn't going to enter the Times Chicken House competition because I thought, well, it's not ready. But then literally about 5 minutes before it closed, I thought, do you know what? I'm not going to get an edit done in time. Let's just send it, see what happens. Entered Guppy about the same time, I think. And then, yeah, heard I'd been shortlisted for both in pretty quick succession. A phone call from Barry Cunningham, head of Chicken House, while I was in the dentist chair, which was pretty special. And I don't remember it at all. I was pretty high, I think. And yeah, and then obviously found out I'd won Times Chicken House in my kitchen over Zoom just over a year ago, which was amazing. It was a bit rambly, but yeah. So competitions have been huge for me in basically launching my career. I have a book out because of a competition.
Yeah.
And as well as keeping me kind of genuinely afloat financially, which obviously
Yeah.
is not a reason to enter because it's they cost a lot, and they are not,
Yeah.
like, the return is obviously pretty minimal, but it's just been a nice thing that it has helped me in a position when I needed it.
Yeah. I think it's interesting what you were saying about that you won this competition and spoke to an agent who had chosen your manuscript, but it wasn't necessarily for her. And I think you will speak to so many published authors. If you are not listing in competitions, that is not because you have a bad book. It's amazing how different competitions, what they're looking for. So Times Chicken House were obviously looking for something they could publish because that was the prize. Whereas Mslexia's prize is a cash prize. So those judges, even though it sounds crazy to think, oh, but readers want these books. So of course, because some readers read this and chose it as their favorite, actually sometimes what readers are looking for, what publishers are looking for, and I know there should not be a disconnect, but there is. It's not exactly the same. So it's really interesting that it was an opportunity that gave you time to write and kept your daughter in nursery. So sort of in a way led to you being able to have time to finish that book and send it off to these competitions. But on the other hand, wasn't like, oh, I won this competition, so of course there were 8 agents fighting over me, and then the film came out the next day, because that's not exactly how it works.
No, exactly. Like, it's important to say that the competitions, like, I think they can be so amazing in so many ways, you know, and it really, really helped me. But I think with publishing competitions, so for example, like Guppy and Times Chicken House, and I think Firefly do one, do they now as well? I could be.
Oh yeah, I think they have got a new one. Yeah.
You know, what's great is that publishers can take risks, you know, more so. So they are, you know, particularly with someone like Chicken House, who kind of specialise in taking on debut authors and, you know, like shaping their career, which is a real privilege. Like, obviously, inevitably, with all agents, the risk is slightly higher for them, because they're like, we've got to take on something that we know is going to sell. So the competition was amazing, and it led to the next thing. But the main thing was getting it finished for the competition and getting it out there, and that is what the competitions did for me, I think.
Yeah. I think that rolls us on quite nicely, actually, to thinking about who's reading your book in these competitions.
Yeah, totally.
So obviously, Times Chicken House, I know for a fact Kezia Lupo is my editor. She does a lot of the initial reading. I'm not sure if she still does for this year, but certainly in past, she's done a lot of the initial reading of that submissions box coming in. So an editor is usually reading the first round of a lot of those manuscripts coming in. On the Right Mentor Novel Award, we've always had other authors and readers reading it. Moving forward to the next award, we're going to be having editors, and we're going to be having professional publishing types reading it, which is interesting because it changes the whole dynamic.
Huge.
Because I assume Mslexia is probably readers as well. I don't remember them saying that before long list and short list round that they have particular editors in. I could be wrong there, but again, changes who's listing your book, right?
Yeah, totally. I think, and like, we have a veritable plethora of like industry professors coming in, you know, and reading these, and it does make a difference as well, because, you know, like, you've got loads of different eyes on it, and people do remember things as well. Like, there are people I know who have not won a competition, but that they have been published because of being like recognized when they work in the competition. They got like the right kind of contact, or they got the right eyes on it. You know. So I think with Mslexia, I'm pretty sure it's like the Mslexia team, and then it goes out to the shortlist of judges. So it is really exciting with Right Mentor this year to kind of see, well, you know, the amount of agents we've got in there, the editors, you know, from like these huge publishing houses. It's big, and I think it's another way for like us as the writers, like pre-published writers, to get that connection with the industry that perhaps we don't get, you know, all the time.
Yeah, I'm actually looking up all of the amazing people right now. That's what I was just doing while you were chatting, Emily. We have judging the long list. So even just get through to the long list, we have Aisha Kaur, who is from the editorial director of Knights of. We have Tom Bonnick, who's an editorial director at HarperCollins. We have Book Lover Joe, who's an amazing school librarian and author. And it's always school librarians and librarians in general. That is who you want judging these competitions. They know what they're talking about. And then for the picture book, we also have the senior commissioning editor at Nosy Crow, who is Alice Bertonsinski. So terrible pronunciation of people's names. We also have from Macmillan Kids for the picture book award, Charlie Castelli, which is amazing. And we have, oh my gosh, so many people. Sanchita Basu Desarka for the long list, who's the owner of Children's Bookshop, which is this incredible independent children's bookshop in Muswell Hill. And then for the short list, we have load of agents, which is
Just
crazy.
like,
So we've got Christabel McKinley, we've got Rachel Petty, we've got Molly Jameson, and we've got our agent Lucy Irvine. So I know that was just me talking and dropping names. I've dropped so many names around me.
yeah, they're just
that I
everywhere.
can't even move.
It's bonkers.
I know,
Like,
yeah.
you know,
Couldn't even pronounce them. I'm so excited. But yeah, we've got like a crazy, like amazing judging panel. So
huge.
it will change a little bit the way we judge it this year, but I think for the better, and hopefully give you guys more
I
exposure.
definitely think so. And like, you know, talking about booksellers and librarians, I think it is easy to forget, as a pre-published author, like we see the kind of the gatekeepers as the agents and the editors, but actually the people that
Yep.
make or break your career are booksellers and librarians and teachers, you know, who will get your book out there and will spread the word. You know, like careers have been made, you know, because they know what the kids want. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
massively. We thought a lot about it when we were choosing. Like, we really wanted to make sure, especially for the long list, that it was a good mixture of a marketing professional, an editorial director, a librarian, and then we move into, for that short list, those agents who, of course, are usually those gatekeepers that get you to
yeah.
those publishers. So it does change a little bit, but I think we can still give, seeing as me and Emily, we've been judging the competition for a couple of years, I think we can still say a little bit about most common mistakes, maybe, or I don't really want to say mistakes, but maybe just like common things that might jar on a reader that you want to make sure you nail before you send it in.
Yeah.
Easy things to fix as well, like not hard things to fix.
Yeah, totally. I think you want to give yourself as much of a chance to stand out as possible, and we'll come on to, I think, won't we, like how to make it stand out. But you know, on the flip side of that, if there's really easy fixes, like Melissa says, to kind of sort of make sure that it's not going to be an immediate like because you know there are going to be so many like I know Times Chicken House when I had like 1,000 I think like that, you know, that's, and even though we've got a huge amount of judges, it's still like a lot of manuscripts for a small group, so you want to be able to kind of give yourself the best possible chance. So if we can help in any way in saying these are some of the things that as readers of competitions that we've gone, do you know what, I think we're just going to have to, you know, don't give them an excuse to say no. So let's see what we've got.
Yeah, definitely. So I always had, I think I put this on my Twitter once, but I had a teacher at school, and he used to say, when you're writing essays, every teacher that's marking those essays, especially when you're doing sort of A-level and GCSE and they're sent out to markers, they're all given about 300 scripts each, which is very similar to obviously being on submission or querying or entering competitions. And they said, look, they're reading like 300 manuscripts about whether JFK was a good president, and it's going to be quite boring, and you've got to imagine that the person reading yours are at the bottom of the pile. They've read 20 essays on the same thing that day. They're half bottle of red down, the baby's crying upstairs, they've had no sleep for 3 days. You need to catch their attention. And so I would say, like, my first one is always start in the right place.
Yeah, that's a really good one.
Be interesting, grab, like, there's some very common ones which I think there's too many to even go through, but for instance, don't have a character just waking up, getting out of bed, getting ready, because that will be so many of the manuscripts that the judges have already read that day, and it's just going to be madness to think then like they're reading another one and the tension starts to wane. And of course we have super professional people reading. I'm talking about specifically myself, and I do read absolutely everything that comes through those first 3,000 words. I read all of it, or sometimes I think we have 1,500 possibly for the novel in development, but however many first words, I read all of it. But sometimes you do find you've drifted and you're on page 3 and you don't actually remember what's happened, and you have to go back, and it's usually because my number one it started the exact same as another one and I actually can't remember.
You need something that sticks it in.
Even if it's the most amazing premise. Start in the right place, I'd say, is a really big one. Just try and start with a bang. Try and start with something interesting that grabs my attention.
Yeah,
on page 1.
Totally agree, because you can't, and it, you know, it's something that we hear so much as writers, you know, like make sure you start in the place, and sometimes it's difficult to know what that means. But actually, having read them and like reading, like all of these, you can see it. You can see like it's like it's almost like a lead up to the bit where it hits the kind of the sweet spot. And I think it's because you know we have that sort of linear brain, or I know that when I wrote and something going through editing that I did, it was linear, like, well, of course, before they get to this important thing, they have to leave the house and they have to do this and they have to do that. And actually, that's not necessary. Like, just, you know, we will, readers' brains and kids' brains are amazing. They can kind of fill in the gaps really easily. So just get straight to the thing. You know, not necessarily the inciting incident, like within the first 2 paragraphs, but in something that is immediately like, this is where we are. It is different. It is unique. You know, just to kind of make them go, we're not going to let you kind of like move on to the next manuscript. You've got to keep reading.
Yeah, and the different or unique thing, I think, especially in children's, we get a lot of. I can't think what the exact numbers are right now. We try and release the numbers of what genres we get. But if you really fantasy and sci-fi, that covers dystopian, that covers futuristic, that covers urban fantasy. It covers a lot of different things, magical realism. So try and just, it doesn't have to be the inciting incident. You want us to get to know the character first, totally understand that. I know that I've got the first 3 or 4 pages up on Amazon for My Love, Life and the Apocalypse, which is my book coming out next year. And on that, I don't have an inciting incident, but I do have a android character going around describing the robots maintaining a city. So I would hope that that'll be enough to grab the reader and say, look, this isn't like your world. Let's escape into this world for a little bit. And so it's something that hooks our attention and isn't quite right.
Yeah, you're totally right. And actually, on that, and something that, again, this will probably come on to what you can do well. I think is voice, but what I'll say, I'll come on to that. But like actually, on the flip side of that, on the reverse side of that, because you want that kind of unique voice, stay away from cliches as much as you possibly can. Because again, like we all do it in our writing. God, I know I have a million times. Her heart sank, or like sort of. I can't even think of an example right now, but I think if it's not something that's unique to your character and unique to your world in that first kind of page, even like it's just people are just gonna be like, oh no, just let's just move on. Just get rid of it. It's like exposition. Just kind of you want to be plunged into that world straight away. And I'm going to use the example of a mentee that I mentored for Right Mentor. Use the word mentor again. Right Mentor last year, who has a really like straight away. She's got such a great voice, and you can write. It's not necessarily that something's happening right that minute. She's in this like amazing scenario. But straight away, there's no cliches in there. It's her voice is very idiosyncratic, and it's who you're in safe hands. You're in safe hands right away, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, I always think of the Hunger Games. So again, guys, if you're not sure quite what we mean, pick a book off a shelf, have a really close read. On the first page of the Hunger Games, I remember that Katniss, she does start with waking up, but bear with me, I know it is a cliche. However, she actually describes the cat that she really doesn't like, her sister's cat, and she says his eyes are the colour of rotten or squashed pumpkin. And it was a really unusual thing to say. And as she goes through that first chapter, she actually describes everything as food. And it's
That's
because
great,
she's hungry.
Isn't it?
And it takes you a minute to click in, and you're like, oh, it's because she's so hungry. And so she just describes everything as like, she describes like scratching herself on something as like the same feeling as scraping hunger, and having hollow days, which are days where you're so hungry you just think you can't go on. And it's stuff like that and it's called, and once you realize, well, it's called the Hunger Games, I've got the blurb here, I know roughly, you realize how clever that is. And those tiny things will draw you in, because Candace doesn't go to the Hunger Games until a few chapters in. She does volunteer at the end of chapter 1, but it's quite a long chapter. I think it's about 5,000 words, because I've looked at this in depth before for exactly this reason for competitions. What hooks people? How long is it supposed to be? How often do people talk? That kind of stuff. Really good little tip there. Just go and look at your favourite books that grabbed you immediately. It'll be different for everyone. And yeah, she just talks about her surroundings, but it's so fascinating because it's so weird, and the way she describes it, something bad is happening that makes you want to read, so you learn about that character, which lends into voice.
And it goes into cliches as well, because like the writer could, Suzanne Collins could very easily have gone, oh, her stomach rumbled, or like, her cat looked a bit grumpy, or whatever, actually, but that, I mean, all of which is true and readable, but what is specific to Katniss and this world is exactly what she's done there. So like, it's not necessarily about making kind of bang explosions straight away, but it is about kind of just tweaking those things, because as a person, and I don't know if I'm able to articulate this properly, like as just a person walking around, you have your own weird comparisons in your head to how things hear and smell and think, like, and how you feel about stuff. You don't automatically always go to the, oh, my stomach sank, you feel like, my daughter said the other day, she said, oh, my tummy's got butterfly wings in it, and that, like, just stuff like that. Everyone's got their own way of describing it. And how does your character and how does your world have those things that aren't the same that you'll see everywhere else?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was going to say something else on that, and I can't remember what it was. So let's move on.
Move on.
Actually, exposition. That's a good one to crack on.
Oh
I
yeah,
think it
yeah, good
is
one.
really tempting. Like, and I totally get it, and I do it like a
Hmm.
lot. And it particularly I find in the early drafts, you kind of want to get all the information out there, and you want to world build, so you just kind of go flare like that. But people will just skip it. Like, how can you weave that through?
Yeah.
Do you think?
Yeah, really, really important. Yeah, and I think when you have exposition, I think I was mentoring someone recently. I was doing an edit for them, and they said, but if I have this really intricate fantasy world, don't I need to put this somewhere? And I'm like, oh yeah, absolutely. There is definitely space for exposition. This is probably bad advice, but it's true. Like once you're into a story, you are going to be more accepting of give me a bit of backstory now. I'll have a bit of exposition, explain how this world works, explain how this system works, whatever it may be, currency, whatever. If it's like say a fantasy setting, but I think at the beginning, the problem is if you start explaining really intricately how something works when I can't even remember the name of your main character because I've met them for 1 second. And I know people really hate hearing that because they're like, but my main character is basically my child. And it is to you. I've never met them. I have no idea who that is. So you need to introduce me to them in a way where I actually care about them. So there's like this thing about if anyone's read Divergent, and there are the 5 different factions. Let's see if I can. So you've got, Kanda, a truthful character from the beginning, great character. I always give really the example of Forrest Gump. We know immediately that he's very truthful, he's very kind, he's very thoughtful and selfless. He's incredibly brave, but he is missing one of those factions, and that is that he's not very bright. And so that's okay. They can have a flaw, but if you can show us some of those characteristics that your character is basically in Divergent in all 5 of those factions, I always think
Yeah,
that's quite
yeah.
clever that she did that. The main character is in for all 5 of those factions, and that is a great way. We want to root for a character that is smart and kind and considerate and truthful and brave. That's who we want to root for. And even if you can only get a couple of those in, show us those things. Don't be telling us about how the currency works when we're actually we need to get to know the character. So that can wait for later, all
Yeah,
that exposition
totally.
stuff.
And I think particularly, and
Yeah.
obviously it depends on what kind of competition you're entering, and who the readers are.
Hmm.
But obviously, a lot of them, there are going to be loads of different genres entering, and you don't necessarily know who your first reader is going to be. So you could enter, for example,
Hmm.
a sci-fi manuscript, and you get a reader who is not au fait or like not necessarily a sci-fi reader, which isn't going to
Yeah.
what's the word disadvantage you if you have kind of made it universal in a way. If you
Yeah.
kind of go in straight to, my opinion anyway, if you go straight in with like all the rules of your sci-fi world, like super kind of technical straight away, that is probably going to distance some readers. If you want the kind of the best
Yeah.
chance, and again, you might, depending on what the competition is, because if there is like a specific sci-fi competition, it's very niche, but then
Yeah.
maybe you can adapt it to that. But with some of these kind of wider reaching competitions, um, how can you make that first chapter universal, that we all understand, like we get the character, we get what they want, that could apply to someone in a sci-fi world, but it could also apply to someone in this contemporary world and a historical world as well. Yeah, so I think weaving in those rules and the world building as much as you possibly can, and not kind of info
Yeah.
dumping straight away, is a really important thing to do, I'd say. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you want to I was just thinking, seeing as we're talking about that, did you want to talk about voice or hooks?
Yeah.
Those are the 2 that are coming to my mind right now.
So I would say with voice, the best way I've actually kind of.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know about. I'd love to hear what you think about this as well, because I feel like actually
Yeah.
the best way I've heard it described has been a couple of times recently, that kind of made me go, oh yeah, that's what voice is, because it's such as kind of like an intangible thing that we hear
Right.
about a lot. I think, like, and you're like,
Oh
what the
my
hell is
God,
that?
yeah.
I don't really know. What is that? What does that mean? Firstly, Lydia Silver said, or we kind of talked about it together. If you imagine an actor, like when you're watching something, you kind of know straight away if this is an actor you feel safe with. If it's an actor, you kind of go, oh, they've got this, they're in hand. I can sit back and I can relax and I can watch them tell the story and I understand who they are. And if you watch something and it's kind of a bad actor, like you're like that, you can't get into the story because you're like, oh, it's oh, I don't believe
Yeah.
anything that they're this is really awkward. It's about having that kind of consistency and that safe, that you're in safe hands, basically. I suppose that's more the authorial voice. If I think it was my editor Rachel who said something about like actually the best way of finding a voice is identifying what yours is personally, like as a person, not even as a writer. Um, and for example, mine, something I always really like in life and something that I always taught is like being very warm and like a slightly kind of wry, sarcastic, quite a British, if you like to put it that way, sort of sense of talking and sense of humour.
Yeah.
And actually, that has kind of bled into my writing a lot, which is something that you go to the darkness of my story, it kind of fits quite well. And I think it's about really identifying both what your voice is as an author, about who you are, and bringing that out as much as you possibly can in your writing. Um,
Yeah.
but also, like, the same as your character. Like, how can you weave those two together? Does that make sense? What do you think?
Yeah, yeah, no, that does make sense. I think it's that is the hardest thing. Is I think some people think of voice as the character's voice, and other people think of voice, especially when it's first person. And first person seems to have got, I'd say, more popular over about the last 10 years. It used to be sort of just a YA thing sometimes, and it's crept in. I feel like it's everywhere now, especially in children's fiction. And then also some people think of voice as so a really good example of someone, and she even is in voice on her Twitter is I love Marianne Keyes. And Marion,
No, but
I
that
know
is,
it's
I
not a
totally get it.
children's example, but it's so voicey. She's written so many books. All the characters are different, but it's so
Yeah.
voicing. You know it's a Marianne Keyes book as soon as you open it, and that's what's really important. I think, say, going to children's, like Terry Pratchett always did that. You knew it was a Terry Pratchett. If you gave me the book and didn't show me the cover, knew it was Terry Pratchett immediately because he had that authorial voice that you knew, and that is important. But I think, yeah, blending the two together is the most important thing. Of course, once you're picked up and you have a brand, you are going to be looking at how you can meld them together even more. The most important thing when you've got a competition and somebody's reading your stuff is they want a sense of you, about 25 to 30% a sense of you as a writer, and to trust you. And I say about this other 75% is they want to trust the character. And I think when I was thinking of hooks, that would be an emotional hook as opposed to, say, a curiosity hook, which I'll talk about after. So an emotional hook is, oh, I care so much about this character. Like, I really care. One of the best examples ever, Pixar absolutely nailing it, Up. You watch Up, you watch the first 5 minutes of Up, you will follow
Yes.
that
Yeah,
man
God,
anywhere. You're obsessed with that man because you have been shown his entire life. You know, you get told all this information about him and you see how he reacts to certain situations, and you have this massive emotional hook, and you don't even care what the story is about at that point and that there was a flying house on the poster.
Yeah.
You will follow that guy anywhere. That's what you need at the beginning, and it is so hard and intangible to explain. A good way with emotional hooks is to put in those divergent qualities. You know, Save the Cat is literally called that because it's the joke is, how do you make a character or even a villain more likable when you have them save a cat? And it's just a little example of, instead of telling us this person is like this because the world is like this, show us this person has just given their last bit of money to this beggar and this person, and then we'll start to like them and we'll want to follow them into the story. So that's like your emotional hook, which feeds into voice, which feeds into authorial voice, and it is still a little bit wishy-washy, but once you get there, you'll get there. And that's what I did when I started listening for competitions. It was when I tried more with the voice, read into stories I love, see what they did with each individual word. Like I said, Katniss using squash pumpkin to describe this thing. And then you start to get there, and then it will actually click. And it's one of those weird things where when it clicks, you find it really easy to write in that voice.
It's so true. And I think, it's funny what you said about first person, because my assumption was that actually I would find a character's voice easier with first person, and when I first started writing I wrote first person, and actually I found that harder to separate it from my own. And the easiest way to blend my personally, and this isn't going to be the same for everyone, but the easiest way to kind of blend the two was to write in third person. So I had a kind of like, or very very close kind of, on the shoulder third person. So you kind of had that kind of mix of the authorial voice that I had, and that kind of who the character is as well. Something that I found that was really interesting about what you said, and it made me think of The Chime Seekers by Ross Montgomery, was about, kind of, you follow that character anywhere. You don't necessarily, the character doesn't have to be this like, yeah, I'm brave and I'm sparky and I'm cool, straight away. Like Katniss is not that at all. Like she is like pretty grumpy. I mean, fair enough. She's not living in the best situation. But I saw this great Twitter thread by Ross Montgomery who was like, you don't have to have I think I'm pretty sure it was Ross Montgomery, about how, there's this kind of belief that you have to have a likable main character. And actually some of the the more interesting characters, especially in the early pages, which is obviously what you're trying to grab with your manuscript for the competition, is, you know, a character who is kind of a bit annoyed, but it's very clear about what they want, and also, you know, you can understand why. So for example, in the Chime Seekers, at the very beginning, you know, he's moving house, which is a very common trope in children's fiction, or in any kind of fiction really, as an opening, but it's also a really powerful one. And again, it's all about how you do it. And, you know, his family is kind of, he's got this baby sister, and his parents are clearly exhausted and they're paying no attention to him. And, you know, on the outside, you're like, oh, here's this little grumpy 11-year-old, you know, who's kind of moaning and whining about the fact that but also you're like, this is a kid who feels abandoned and a little bit, he just wants his family back, but he can't articulate that yet. So already what Ross has done there, not necessarily likable, but he's very quickly established what that character's want and that character's need is, which aren't necessarily the same thing. So obviously his want is, I want my family back the way it was, and his need is to kind of accept the fact that he's got a baby sister now, and, you know, like, and sort of grow and move with that family, and that
That's so true. They don't have to be likable. It does not have to be likable, totally. But it does have to be relatable. It's really, especially, in fact, in sci-fi fantasy, I always think, has to be someone that, even if their predicament is in another universe and is completely different law and rules to yours, they have to be, at the very least, you have to relate to them and think, actually, I do feel for that character. That's where that emotional hook comes in. Yeah, you're totally right. They don't have to be likable, but they do at least have to be relatable. Yeah,
you're totally right. And it's, you know, you have to see what it is that that one is and understand it, like you say. I think that's super important. Hooks wise, should we go on to hooks?
Yeah, so the other hook I was mentioning was, I think there's lots of different categories, but I sort of think of them as emotional hooks, like the character, and then you've got the curiosity hooks, as I call them. I don't know if other people call them that, but I just think, you know, these are cliffhangers. So however many chapters or however many words your opening is for the competition, especially, because obviously we're going to be talking about openings a lot, because that's what we're sending in for the competition. So a lot of this is really just stuff about openings. But at the end of the day, the actual words you've written within that sample are the most important part of your entry. So that's obviously why we're talking about it a lot. So I think having that cliffhanger that's really important, that asks a question where you really, really desperately want to know, well, what happened then? And then you turn over and there's a blank page, and you want the reader to be like, no, like, I need to know what happened next, and that you want them to be really, really interested. Even if you have a synopsis, we've all done it. Like, I know people who read, which is blasphemy, but I know people who read like the last page of a book or check how it ends before starting. But there is still something about, if there's a particular secret that you don't know. I started listing after I cut the first 10,000 words of my book, which was all world building and exposition. And if anyone's read The Undying Tower, which is the one that listed a lot, I then slotted in all of those bits as flashbacks. So I did put them in, but later, because I didn't need all that world building in the very opening chapters. And when I cut that and got to the bit where, so it's a very explosive first chapter, literally. It's literally in chapter 1, so it's not much of a spoiler. I started getting more, basically asking, oh, you've longlisted, would you like to send the rest of your manuscript? When I put an explosion at the end of chapter 1, and I built it up, and I knew who'd done the explosion, but nobody else obviously did, and the character, my main character Sadie, does not know. And that was when, and what's interesting about that is a lot of competitions allow 5,000 words as their opening. Now, the reason I said depending on how many chapters you have, if you're submitting a chapter book, obviously you've got more words, where you might have several chapters in, say, 3,000 words or even 1,500 words. I'm writing YA, so my chapters are about 3,000 words long. I used to just cut and paste the first 5,000 words into a Word document, send it off. And what was happening was I was answering the really important hook in chapter 1 before setting up an interesting curiosity hook in chapter 2, because I try and end my chapters on cliffhangers. And so, of course, they got their answer. They read a little bit more, and I was starting to explore more about the world. And they were like, oh, okay, well, you know, I'm not as obsessed as I am with this one. I'm only allowed to put through 3, so I'm going to pick this one. It was when I actually took the sort of bold move to not submit the full 5,000 words. I started submitting 3,000 words. I submitted till the end of my first chapter and sent that. And a lot of those competitions, I remember Bath used to say that all the time. They were like, you don't have to send the first. It's just wherever you want to cut it off. Make sure you don't cut it off mid-sentence. But I pretty much just copied and pasted. Bam, that's 5,000 words, send. And actually, look for the best place to cut it off for that hook. You want somebody to be desperate to call your manuscript in, especially if there's not much space on that long list. You want to give yourself the best possible chance of someone calling it in and reading the rest of it. So that is a top tip. You don't need to follow, obviously, don't go over the guideline of how many words, but try and make sure that wherever you cut it off is a really good little
That's a
cliffhanger.
really
So
good
you
way of
hook
putting
in
it.
that
Yeah,
reader.
like that's really good advice because the temptation is you want
Oh,
to like give as much of yourself as possible, like give yourself the best possible chance. But actually, like stopping at a place where people go, "Oh, what's going to happen next? I have to know," is gonna give you so much
yep.
more of a chance. Like in terms of it, it really is. Um,
Yep.
and actually, it's interesting you say that about
Yeah.
hooks, because when I was thinking about hooks, I was thinking about it from a point of view of your pitch, which obviously again, this might be slightly more relevant to the publishing based competitions because they are looking for something that they can sell. Like I know after Times Chicken House, Jazz, who is the publicity or marketing manager, oh my gosh, I'm going to get marketing. Both. I'm really sorry if that's wrong.
Maybe a bit of both.
Terrible. She posted a thing about how like there were so many manuscripts they liked, but there were only some that they knew that they could sell. And so to a certain extent, if you are entering a
Yeah.
competition like that, or like Guppy, or as possibly Firefly, we can't remember if that is one that's running or not. Um, I think you want to show that your book will sell, and the way to do that is to create a powerful pitch. And we know that that is really tough. And I've got a really quick takeaway,
Yeah.
and like if this is okay to share, the way that I did it, and there's going to be, I think I recorded a thing that's going to go up on like the TikTok or the Instagram or whatever it is. So I'm repeating myself a little bit. But I used to work as an events organizer for a heritage organisation, and you'd have to create the event. You then have to write the kind of the flyer copy or the blurb, which would be like you say, like your synopsis, and then you'd have to write 2 or 3 lines for the magazine, which would then go to all people's homes. If you can imagine that your pitch are those 2 or 3 lines in a magazine that makes people while they're like eating their breakfast, like running after their kids, circle it and go, "That's an event I want to take my kids to." If you can do that in 2 or 3 lines, that
Yeah.
think of that as your pitch. Like and that probably means sometimes getting rid of some extraneous
Yeah.
information. What are the universals that will make people go bam? Like, and I think, like on your cover letter, make sure you've got that pitch down. Would you say?
Yeah. Yeah, I actually also sometimes recommend. I'm pretty sure we're asking for a synopsis for the Right Mental competition. I should probably know that. But any competition you're entering where they ask for a synopsis, I actually say there's nothing wrong
Hmm.
with popping a pitch at the top if you can obviously still fit your synopsis onto that one page or whatever's being you're being told as a competition rules, because you want to not only grab their attention but make sure that later when they're sat eating their dinner and their wife asks, "Oh, what did you read? Aren't you reading for that competition?" Or what came into your editorial box today? And they say, "Oh yeah, let me think.
Yeah.
Oh, there was this one," and they can remember your pitch because you were. It's not even necessarily that you were maybe the most out there story that they read or the most original, but if you can boil down that pitch into something, as they call it, high concept, where it's very easy to explain.
Yeah.
Snakes on a plane, very good example of high concept. It's about snakes on a plane. Very easy to remember what it's about. If you go to cinema, what should you see? Snakes on the plane. So it's very easy to boil down. That's what you want. And I always think there's nothing wrong with popping that at the top of the synopsis. It's not necessary. You don't have to do it, but it's something I recommend because I think it sticks in people's heads better when they're
Yeah,
reading
that's a
dozens
really
of
really good idea.
manuscripts.
And like I said, that absolutely the high concept thing, and it does take some work. And so I would recommend sharing it with like critique partners, or plug it on Twitter if you want to. Like however you want to get that pitch refined. It can seem like it's not an important part of the competition, but it really is. And it's the same as the cover letter. Again, I know that Times Chicken House ask why you are the person to write this. Again, for a publishing house, they are going to be taking on an author as well. So why would they want to take you on? But again, for Right Mentor, like we want to know why you're the right person to write this book. What there could be a million books on, I don't know, whatever, but you are particularly this person because you have lived experience of this, or because you know I don't know. I can't think of an example, but I think it's really important just to kind of highlight, because people do look at it, like we really do. It doesn't just go on the pile. Um, I
Yeah.
think that's it's an important thing to get right if you can.
Yeah, we take in all the information, and obviously, once you get to, if you're lucky enough to get to the shortlist stage and talented enough to get to the shortlist stage, then you have agents who are looking to build your career and will also
Yeah,
wonder about these things when they're looking to, crown the winner, potentially sign somebody. Who knows? That's the great thing about the Right Mentor competition, is you're getting in front of so many eyes of so many professionals. If you can catch the attention of one, that's an incredible thing. If they can remember your little pitch, and even if you go years later and submit to them, that's great, because they will remember that.
Exactly.
If you
And
make
so,
it
like you
memorable.
say, it is, I mean, it's a really hard thing to do, but like run it by as many people as you possibly can. Like get as many, get people's
Yep.
thoughts and ideas on it, and refine it until you think it's in the best shape that it possibly could be. Is what I would say.
Yep.
We'll see what else
Yep.
have we. I feel like there's
Yep.
some stuff we haven't covered yet. Let's have a little look at my little list.
Yeah, I'm sure there's definitely is. I'm just thinking general things.
Yeah.
Obviously, always read the rules. Do not. I know it's so tempting. I was talking about not writing as much as, say, if it's 5,000 words, if you want to cut off at 3,000, that's fine. I know how tempted you will be, but 5,005 words will be perfectly too short. Don't do it. Number one, depending on the competition, because you have not followed the rules, they are completely within their rights to not read it. Like, I don't think that's ever happened with us, but I would strongly recommend, if they've told you that, it's to save their readers time. You have no idea. We could be getting 1,000 entries. Don't give anyone a reason to disqualify you. So please, please, please read the rules, submit everything you're supposed to, keep that synopsis to, say, 1 page if that's the rule. Make sure that you've got your extract to the right length. The way I would put it is, like, just don't annoy anyone. If you could have the best book in the world, but if you annoy your reader by not formatting it correctly, and I know it sounds so trivial and so silly, and to be honest, we're quite forgiving. Other people have been quite forgiving. I know we have been in the past, definitely, about small things. Don't worry too much. Don't panic too much if you realize that you sent it in 1.15 spacing instead of 1.5, but do try and follow the rules as carefully as possible, and don't rush. So the other flip side is, don't wait until the very last day of the competition, which I think ours is the very last day of January, to enter. Look, as I say, do as I say, not as I do. I've done it. I know how stressful it is. I have done it. I am not going to lie to you and say I haven't done it. But writing it at 5 to midnight and then sending an email saying that you've messed up your entry, not going to win you lots of friends. So try and get it in early. If you know you're somebody who needs to reread the instructions several times, like I do, make sure you reread them. Try and send it. If the thing is, if something comes up and there's a problem, or you realize the file's corrupt or doesn't work, and you've sent it a week in advance, we can help. But that is very difficult if you send it 5 minutes before the deadline. And maybe, I think I had one once where it was Mslexia. I think it was Mslexia years ago. And it was, it got jammed. It was either Mslexia or Bath, and it got jammed because so many people were entering at like 5 to midnight. So it wouldn't send. And it was really stressful. But of course, they were very kind about it. But really, I should have sent it earlier.
Yeah.
Then there wouldn't have been such an issue. But of course, if you just spot this last minute and you're watching this on the 30th of January and you're like, oh, I'd love to enter this competition, of course it's open until midnight. Of course you can. But I would strongly recommend, if you know you're somebody who really needs to concentrate on the rules and stuff, enter earlier. And make sure that you read everything very carefully, because there's no rush. It's open for a couple of months. So
yeah, you're so right. It's definitely about knowing how you work and give yourself the best possible chance. And kind of on that as well, and as Melissa and I have mentioned, we have both done this, but don't. I think, if there is a chance, okay, we've all had these people who are like, I know that I will enter this, my opening, and I will have it totally finished by the time the long list comes out, so at which point the full manuscript will be called up. Like, obviously, whatever I'm not going to sit here and dictate, like, don't do that, because I have, that's in some ways it's a good way of a deadline. It's a good way of kind of sort of incentivizing yourself to get there. And there are writers who I know who are doing that, who are amazing and who will get there. I would err on the side of not doing that, because we have been in a position at Right Mentor where we have loved the opening of a manuscript and we've asked for the rest of it and it's not there. And and the thing is, that doesn't just kind of like annoy necessarily us, but particularly in not annoy's the wrong word, but it doesn't it doesn't necessarily kind of, it doesn't just affect us, I suppose. It'll affect the readers. And the thing is, we're in a position where the readers are these people in the industry. Do give yourself the best possible chance. I babbled a bit then. Am I making sense?
No, you're totally right.
Good.
And I think we were talking about before we started about making sure that we understand that competitions can sometimes be incentives to get something finished. And that's not necessarily a bad reason to enter a competition, but also we are not a free competition. You may have a budget. And if you're thinking, every year, I used to set aside at the beginning of the year for January through to December, I'd set aside £300 to enter all the competitions I wanted to enter. And that was me taking away other stuff for myself, like that's one night out less, and I have to cancel this monthly membership, but I'm going to do that, so I've got sort of between £20 and £30 a month to spend on competitions, because they're not free a lot of the time. Some are, that's amazing. Ours isn't free. Please don't throw your money away. Like, it would be great if you make sure it's finished. It would be awful. We have called in manuscripts for shortlisting and they just weren't finished, and it was awful because of course that person then has that great high of knowing, oh well, I'm on the right track because it went really well, and it can be an incentive, but also not being able to finish it and knowing they weren't able to finish it was quite sad, because then they couldn't obviously be on the list.
Exactly. And life does happen, it's so difficult to kind of say for definite that you're definitely going to get something done. Like that would, again, I don't want to like dictate what anyone does, but like Melissa says, like it is money, and if there's not, if there's a chance that it's not going to happen, then maybe save it if you possibly can, because, and I know that like extreme dopamine hit that like one needs as a writer sometimes, because it can be so solitary and such a drudge, and that actually you kind of like, I want to do it, but there will be other opportunities. Like throughout the year there are other opportunities. It does come quickly, so don't rush to do something if it's not going to give you the best chance in your career. Does that make sense?
And absolutely. And don't forget, as I just said, our competition is open until end of January. So in terms of a deadline, you could use that if you wanted. You could think to yourself, okay, well, I promise I'm going to spend the next 2 months writing my book. I've already got 30,000 words from NaNoWriMo. I'm going to finish it. I'm going to get to 45,000 of my middle grade book. And I'm going to set goals every day. And I'm going to use the competition deadline to enter, not at midnight, at least like 9 a.m. the day of. And you're going to get it in. And then you know it's finished. And you've got that time, and because that's why we don't only open it for a week or for a day. It's open for 2 months. And a lot of them do that. A lot of them are open for several months. You can see one open and tell yourself, okay, and set up, word count goals every day and that kind of stuff. And it can still be used as an incentive to drive you forward. And trust me, you'll still get a dopamine hit from writing the end. And knowing it's finished and sending it off. And then you've got a manuscript that you can send to other competitions and start querying with, or whatever you need to do.
Totally. Yeah, you're so right. So I was thinking, should we maybe like think of if we had to have like one tip? I know that's like extreme putting on the spotness, but should we like one tip maybe for the competition? Do you want me to go first? Because I was thinking of it.
Go for it.
Okay.
I'll have a think.
Okay, so I suppose my one tip, having read them, and this is something that has become clearer since I've been a reader for competition, more so than when I was entering them, I would say, I'll stop that again. That was my hint. If you can start at chapter 2, start at chapter 2. Because so much of what we see is brilliantly written, but you don't need it. I think if you can get straight to the world, straight in there, again, without exposition, without kind of sort of that heavy build-up, really interrogate your work, and even if it means kind of killing your darlings, it is something that you've beautifully written because you've worked on it loads, because it's your opening page, your opening chapter, fantastic. How much of that do you actually need? Like, and be ruthless if you can, is what would be my tip/hint.
Yeah, that's good. Because as I say, I cut the first 10,000 words from mine before I started.
Like
so
that's
it wasn't even chapter 2. It was like chapter 5. Move on down the road. Like massively cut loads of stuff. That's a really good one. I think mine is this is something that anyone can do. Look for blank space on the page. So remember, we're reading an A4 page that has 500 words on it, as opposed to a novel which will have 250 words per page and be really nicely spaced out with lots and lots of white space around it, and it's not hard on your brain. And that's the entire point of the novel. Have a look. Are your first 2 or 3 pages just huge long paragraphs of description? If they are, look for that white space. Where can you break up those paragraphs? That will help. You don't want to read it to open it and think, oh, that looks like a wall of text. The wall of text, it frightens everyone. It's in textbooks. There's a reason we're scared of it. Look for white space. A really good way to look for white space is put in dialogue. I remember a few agents when I was querying were saying, like, one of their top tips was always, we don't see a lot of dialogue on page 1. It'd be really nice to hear your character speak. Like, it'd be really nice.
Yeah.
And it's so true. So look for blank space. If you don't have it, look for ways for your character to interact with something around them, to speak to somebody. And obviously that is, as we know, you put a new line, dialogue, and that will create white space and have a little bit for us to pause and think about your world. So that would be my number 1 tip. That is very easy to look at. You can even zoom out your entire manuscript on Word, like zoom out your 5,000 words, see where there are little blocks of text, zoom in on that page. Where can you break it up? Because that is something that is, it sounds really trivial and silly, and obviously the best book in the world probably wouldn't put you off. I'm sure we've all read books we go, but my favorite book has a wall of text. Well, yeah, but we are trying to compete. This is a competition. We're talking about competitive writing, which is kind of horrible to talk about because it's an art form, but it is competitive. So you want to make sure you're giving yourself the best possible chance, and I would strongly recommend, especially in children's fiction, white space on the page.
That's a really good way of putting it, I think. Yeah, totally. Because, like, I think that dialogue, that kind of blend of, like, you've grounded it maybe with, like, where you are, so the dialogue's not just like floating in space, but you've got that kind of lovely mixture of kind of the setting and knowing who your character is through kind of relation to other people. Actually, that's kind of an ideal opening in a lot of ways, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you need to think. I always think, if I was watching this as a movie, is anybody into, even Katniss at the beginning of the Hunger Games movie talks to the cat and then talks to Gale when she gets to the forest. A lot of it is quiet and the music playing and a little bit of credits, but think of it like a movie. If I was watching this movie, how long has your character been walking around in silence, not reacting to anything? You'd be amazed. I do it all the time. I'm saying this as somebody who does that. That's why I know it happens. Whereas if you can break up the white space with something, either action or dialogue, then they're doing something when I'm watching them on the screen.
That's so true. And kids love dialogue. Like, it is really, you just kind of look at some of the stuff that's popular at the moment, like that kind of sort of dialogue between characters is a bit, with the kind of the rise of screens and that they watch, it's a really easy way for them to kind of relate to characters. So if you don't have as much dialogue in there as maybe you think you should have, do try and insert something that I would recommend. I think, that white space is a really lovely tip.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Sorry, my dogs are barking if you can hear them. It's just...
No, I can't hear dogs at all.
Crabbing coming.
Christmas crabbing. Great. So I think, is there anything else that we haven't covered? Like, it is really important to say if there's anything, because obviously there's a lot of, we've like gone through a few little bits and there's probably some stuff we've missed. So, like, message either of us, at any point if you want any kind of anything.
And our emails are obviously on the website. It's easy to contact us. So absolutely. If you need any more tips or you just have questions as well, this is the other reason why not to leave it till the last minute. If you have any questions, ask us now, and then you can prepare your manuscript and we have time to reply.
Totally.
And that's very important.
Like, we want, it's like an actor going to an audition. We want you to do well. Like as the readers of the competition, who, the industry professionals, they want to pick up a manuscript and they want to go, this is the one. So, like, if there's any way we can help to kind of get you in a place, where you feel like you know more about what's going on, just get in touch. We're really happy to talk about it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, absolutely. So, just ask questions, leave yourself loads of time, read the instructions.
Yes.
Top tips. Yeah, they seem very simple, but you'd be amazed. I'm sure most of you are doing this. This is the other thing as well. Most people are amazing in these competitions. We sound like we'd be really grumpy. Yeah. Most people read all the rules, send an amazing piece in. So at that point, follow the tips from earlier in the video, which is how to stand out. But there are some basic ones that you really have to absolutely nail, or you will be either disadvantaging yourself, really, with your reader.
Exactly. Oh, and one thing I was going to say before I forget, time zones. If you're an international entrant, make sure you've got you account for time zones. Again, like, not leaving it to last minute is probably preferable with this, but do make sure that you have checked the right time shift. Make sure you check the right time shift.
We're on London time.
Yeah.
We're on London time. So you can use Google. Ask Google. Ask Alexa. She will know.
Exactly.
What time is it here? If it is, yep, absolutely. That's a good one.
Yeah, because I do know that people have been tripped up by that before. But I think probably We've been yattering on for about 59 minutes. So
I know, Chris.
I know. So should we
Just so many tips.
Yeah, there are all the tips. Should we call it a
Yeah.
day and then like say, yeah, do reach out if you need to at any point.
Yes, absolutely. Yep. And good luck, guys.
Yeah,
Good luck.
best of luck. We cannot like I'm so excited to see what like we've got so like such amazing stuff has come from this competition. Some amazing writers and I can't wait to see what like this round's going to bring. So
Same. I'm so excited, and I know it can be so nerve-wracking. So thank you very much. If you choose to trust us with your words, like thank you so much.
Yeah.
And we really look forward to reading them.
we are thanking you and happy Crabman everyone.
Bye, guys.